How are you guys today?
Good.
Great.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet both of you too. Congratulations. This movie is absolutely incredible. Um,
Thanks.
I assume it's always great to not only talk about it, but continue hearing the amazing praise that it's been getting ever since its release.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you certainly hope that people embrace it, and I'm a glass half empty kind of guy, so I go right to the negative ones, But you learn something from those too.
And by the way, the visual effects work in this film is just, I mean, some of the best I've ever seen. I remember watching it when it came out in IMAX, and my jaw was on the floor the entire
Yeah,
time.
I
Just
would
absolutely
agree,
incredible.
man. I think they did it, and Eric did a great job doing the impossible. It's really amazing stuff.
Thanks. Fun time.
Yeah, for sure. So the movie is set many generations after Caesar and showcases how the apes have evolved over time. And what I like about the movie is that it doesn't necessarily continue where the previous trilogy ended,
Right.
but it also retains the same sense of continuity between those movies. I'm
Mhm.
wondering to start, was it something that you thought about how to set
Yeah,
this new
that was
chapter within the
that
apes?
was
Yeah.
the original, challenge, is okay, we want to make another Apes movie. There's nothing. We have nothing. What do we do? You know what I mean? At first, I was hesitant to even attempt it, but then I had that idea. It's like what you don't want to do is just feel like a part four. I felt pretty strongly about that. I didn't just want to go and just continue on doing that thing. As much as people, including myself, wanted to kind of see that story go, it felt like we'd be on a downtrend instead of an uptrend, right? With that kind of thing. But and so that was a big issue, concept of that whole um, of cutting 300 years later and following a new set of characters, basically, right? But at the same time, he didn't want to lose all that great, stuff from Caesar and this storyline. So we tried to figure out how to do a story that kind of was about Caesar and about a new beginning at the same time. You know what I mean? So it was this kind of weird soft reboot thing. And so that was kind of the original idea, and then everything else kind of stemmed from that. And where we came up with this kind of little adventure, it's kind of more of a coming of age story this time. That the light itself in the movie, the aesthetic of it, felt a little bit like we're marching towards that 1968 Charlton Heston world, even in its kind of looks, and how we use old 60s lenses and that kind of stuff. So it kind of felt like we were straddling both worlds in this movie. You know what I mean? And hopefully at the same time start or at least let people fall in love with some of these characters, so they want to continue to see it. The franchise continue on with in this with these stories. You're muted.
Sorry about that.
Right.
It's interesting to watch the movies over time and see how the technology has also evolved in
Yeah.
terms of also, performance capture. Like right now, I'm rewatching all the Lord of the Rings movies, and that movie really laid the groundwork to how
Sure.
performance capture was sort of adopted within cinema. But I feel like Avatar and Rise of the Planet of the Apes were the two movies where people really started to take the art, because it's really an art of performance capture,
Sure.
seriously. And I'm wondering if you can both talk about how the advancements of performance capture really helped shape how the actors would be directed, but also how the look of the apes would be designed on screen.
Yeah,
Eric,
sure.
you want to go?
Well, I guess I mean the interesting cycle with like the Avatar thing, because the Avatar really sort of took motion capture and turned it into performance capture, basically.
Mhm.
Um, and then Rise of the Planet of the Apes came along, and we went, let's take this outside. Because the Avatar movies were entirely made within the confines of a nice, comfy, climate controlled, perfectly
Yeah,
perfectly hermetically sealed, mocap stage. But you have to deal with all sorts of unexpected things when you say we're going to take this on location. And so Rise of the Planet of the Apes worked out in a really kind of crude prototype, sort of almost,
Cool.
hardware side of things, version of that kind of story. Now we fast forward 10 years, and a bunch of years had gone into upgrading hardware and techniques and things to do the second Avatar film, and then now another Apes film comes along and we take it outside, and so there's this fun cycle that seems to be kind of emerging here, but a lot of the advancements, it was all about sort of making sure we were getting greater fidelity and higher precision and sort of what we're getting from the actors' facial cameras. It was allowing us to go a little more free form, I guess, on the capture side of things. Like it would allow us to go when we were shooting in Australia on this one. We didn't have to be so buttoned down and like super calibrated, because that when we were going into, you know, some pretty crazy sort of wild locations, because in doing that requires a whole bunch of people. It requires a ton of infrastructure and a lot of
Giant
times,
trucks.
yeah,
We can't get up the mountain.
a lot of times that sort of footprint doesn't fit into some of the kind of places that we wanted to shoot the movie in. And so where we could take advantage of that, we certainly were, because that gives us really great quality. But, you know, we had other ways and other tools, and some of that came out of the Avatar, the Way of Water film, to be able to be a little bit more light footprint on the capture day and still get all the performance that Wes is getting from his actors, you know, in the moment in front of camera. So.
It's also interesting to see how the technology has evolved, but also the apes also evolve within the movies. Like they've now developed, you know, very sophisticated body language, and also they're able to speak, whereas the humans, in this case especially, they've regressed and they don't speak anymore. At least at the beginning of the film.
Evolution.
The speech, yeah, the speech aspect of this one was the
It was
biggest.
scary. Actually, that was scary going in. There was a lot of conversations about how much are they going to talk.
Yeah, because, you know, obviously we've, you know, it's not the first time apes have spoken in the films.
Yeah.
Everybody remembers like bad ape, you know, was quite a chatterbox in the last film, and Caesar was speaking more by the end of four. But every character of the dozen characters that we had to make, hero characters we had to make in this movie, are speaking roles. And so there was a huge, there's more speaking in this film than there have been in the entire previous trilogy combined. And so that brings upon other requirements to be, you know, to take that data that we had from the advancements in the acquisition side of things and be able to feed that into, you know, utilizing things like some deep learning in the facial solving aspect of it, to sort of give the facial animation team like a nice consistent baseline solve that they can build their facial performance on top of. And instead of having to work through the nuts and bolts of a lot of this really complex facial deformation stuff, it meant that we didn't that we could tackle a huge amount more work with the same size crew that we've done with the previous movies. That was huge.
Yeah, and then what's interesting about it too is that not only are we visiting more worlds in this movie, and it's more of a road movie, like it's all new characters, you know, with all new costumes, and like, you know, it's wild the amount of complexity and work for this on this thing is it's hard to appreciate, you know.
Well, does it bring a challenge to direct actors whose emotions have to be conveyed through very subtle shifts in their faces, especially in regards to the apes?
You know, no, not really, to be honest. Like that part of it feels very much like a traditional movie. You know what I mean? You can feel it on stage, on set. You know, you can like say, "Oh, that was a little too big," or "That's too small." The hard part really is thinking about, you know, keeping in your mind that, oh, it's going to become an ape. You know what I mean? And so like there were points when, like, you know, let's say this, when you're editing the movie, you're not seeing apes, right? You're seeing, you know, guys in suits with like a camera in most of their takes, you know, covering half their face. You know what I mean? You know, so you have to kind of like, you know, take a little bit of leap of faith and sort of I told myself basically when we were editing the movie that don't forget that it's going to be impressive watching an ape think. You know what I mean? To watch them just sit there and just dream and, you know, all this kind of stuff, right? So I tried to sometimes just account for that in the cut and just make sure that, yeah, you might be getting, you know, this might feel too long right now when it's a silly looking actor with a bunch of technology on his head, but when it's an ape, it's going to be fantastic. And then it's really Erik's team. Like, you know, the actors can be as subtle as they want. We can make all the choices that we want. But the idea though, that, you know, that the team at Erik's team at Weta, you know, they take what they see on the camera that we shot, the footage, and they can interpret the performance onto an ape, right? It doesn't like, there's like a button that kind of says, oh, make it all just kind of turn into an ape. Like someone has to go in there and say, oh, there's like this little thing he does with his eye where it twitches for a second. You know, we're missing that. Or like there's a thing where like the lower eyelids go up to 2 millimeters, but the top upper, you know, brows go up. And they're looking at all these little subtle nuances, and if not outright kind of applying it to the digital character, finding an interpretation of what that emotion feels like onto an ape face. So it's a fascinating process, man. It's crazy.
It's a translation. Yeah, is kind of like probably the best way to put it, because it's there isn't necessarily going to be a one-to-one mapping. We're not, if the actor raised their lip this much, if we do that on an ape, it may look ridiculous. It may, and that's the thing where the skill and the talent of the facial animators comes in, and it's so much about looking at what am I getting from the actor? Like, what is the emotion that I am reading on their face right now, and what can I do to make sure that we're getting the same emotion from the ape face, not necessarily the same emotion, if that makes sense. Because so much of, I think, when we go into these projects, there's this, the actors, they're not looking for actors that are going to give a great ape impersonation. We're looking for actors that can, like, just truthfully play
Yeah.
As humans, and that's what we're mapping onto the ape. Obviously they're throwing in the occasional hoo, 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 that stuff as well, because they are playing apes, but it's not about,
it becomes a very internal thing for them. It's almost like they've now spent 8 weeks, whatever it is, just running around pretending to be apes, in ape school. And that by the time we're shooting on cameras, we got all the crew here and all the money is being spent. We're not trying to invent that stuff. It's already in them. They can just turn it on like a switch. And it's like, it was really important to kind of get there, especially for all of us who had never done this before. Most of the actors had never done mocap before. It was a new thing for them, so a lot of it was about just, calming them down. And, you have to get a certain actor that's willing to go on this crazy adventure. You know what I mean? Not just everyone wants to do that, but we found the right people that just like embraced this thing and just, committed to it and wanted to do the best they possibly could. And it's fun to watch them run around, and all with their stilts or whatever it is, and they own it, man. They just really, a lot of the credit goes into them, and all the heart and soul they pour it into it.
Is there a specific balancing act that one has to do in not only making the visual effects look as great as they should in terms of scale and scope, but also really serve the story, the characters, and be believable within the eyes of the viewer, so they forget they're watching something that's completely digital, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, that's all over the movie, right? There's at least 30 something minutes of full CG in the movie, which means we didn't shoot anything, we didn't capture anything, we didn't build anything. And so how do we kind of make sure that stuff, still feels like it belongs, all the stuff we did shoot, and we're limited by the sunlight, or the crew, or the truck got stuck in the mud over there, we can't get the thing over. It's like there's all these kind of realities that come into making a regular traditional live action movie, little spontaneous things that we've tried to make sure that always came into the movie, even though it's this very technical process. You very much start on a regular movie, here at the beginning, after you start prep, you start shooting, and you kind of end over here when you deliver the movie. And most movies kind of have their little path to that. And ours kind of goes like this over here, and they go over here, and they go over here, and here, and they eventually end up at the same spot. You know what I mean? It's this really complicated process. But that is a thing that's just sort of my aesthetic. It's like I like to be dynamic. I like the cameras to feel spontaneous, like we almost made it up on the fly. And of course, that's hard to do in a movie that's this technical. You know what I mean? So like, everything all over the movie, there's a lot of that stuff. And sometimes having the full CG of it all, it actually freed us, from having to kind of be constrained and limited. But at the same time, when you have like the power to do anything, it's sometimes you really have to kind of restrain yourself, to not go that impossible camera move or not do that kind of thing, So we worked really hard to try to make sure that it all felt very grounded and real. And I don't want to say it in a negative way, but almost mundane. Like this is like probably my first movie where I actually had a camera on sticks, and I didn't move the camera. I just sat there and shot a frame. You know what I mean? Most of the time I'm always like, oh, let's give it a little drift, or let's give it a little camera dolly, or what, fancy it up a little bit. But it's like we got to this point in this movie where it's so impressive just to watch this ape who's a synthetic character just think and just sit there and just read an expression and emotion on their face. Like we almost don't need the distraction of the fancy kind of like filmmaking stuff around it. Just kind of enjoy what it is, and it actually kind of works for the story in that way. You know what I mean? And then we have like the design of the characters themselves, and how that kind of influences the story and what they're wearing and all the little things that people probably haven't caught on to yet when they watch the movie. Little things in the background that you don't even realize that we changed that rock to be a piece of ruin, in the background that's blurry that you don't even know. It's like there's all this kind of like stuff to kind of make it feel like we traveled, 1,000 years in the future, or 300 something years in the future after the world ended, and we just happened to capture it all. You know what I mean? It was a really fun. It was fun. It was a fun project for sure.
For me, that was the most interesting part, was seeing, sitting with the characters before the action really began moving, which I don't think we had that much time with in the other Apes movies, where we
Yeah.
really took the time to be with them, see how their
Yes.
daily lives operates. That was the
Yeah.
most, for me, that was the most fascinating part
Yeah, we
of
wanted to
watching
really
that
create a
movie.
world, immerse
Yeah.
people in a world, and it asks a certain amount of patience from the audience to kind of immerse themselves in this thing. And I have to admit, there are some people, and just when you kind of show this movie, you test it around and with like some friends and different crews, there are people that just for whatever reason, because it's an ape, they cannot get into it. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work for them. You know what I mean? But fortunately, there's a lot more people that once you get past that first 3 or 4 minutes, it almost always happens. It's that first 4 or 5 minutes where like you get acclimated to seeing apes, doing this thing, and eventually it becomes less of a VFX movie, just a regular old movie. You know what I mean? It was really fascinating, kind of to learn that kind of thing, that psychological thing of uh of how we kind of engage with basically synthetic things on screen. You know what I mean? It was cool.
Well, I'd love to talk about the final scene of the movie where May floods the bunker. From a purely visual perspective, it's probably the best scene of the film. I was so astonished by just how
Oh,
amazing it looked. I'm wondering if you can both talk about working on that scene and what was probably some of the biggest endeavors on that
well,
on that
I'll just say this really
sequence.
quickly, and I'll let Eric talk because the technical aspect of that thing, it needs to be appreciated. I think it is for the most part, full CG. There is no real water we had for any of that sequence, right? So we had a little location in a parking garage that we had for like one big space, and we had a little stage for like this big open kind of area. But even that got so changed and replaced and covered with water, it almost didn't matter. For the most part, this is Eric's team kind of convincing us that we actually flooded a giant warehouse, with stuff and fire and whatever and sparks and digital apes, of course. You almost take that for granted. You know what I mean? They're just digital apes running around in CG water, And so, an idea that we kind of had and we knew it was going to come and I'll say this, it was definitely a sequence that evolved over the not only shooting but also the post-production. We had storyboards, we had previs, we had all this kind of stuff, and then we really as a team sort of found it together to find the most kind of interesting and again, I want to say almost mundane. I didn't do anything too fancy in that whole sequence. So we just try to make it feel like we really did this, and we try to constrain ourselves like a cameraman had to be tethered, touch the thing, and you could feel the water kind of rushing up against them. And all the cameras, they're all synthetic. We didn't shoot those shots. They had to be animated. They had to be kind of created by a team, So giving it those kind of like sense of we really did this, guys, wink wink, you know what I mean? That was a really a real effort, I guess, and then there's the technical aspects of how the hell we pulled something like that off, and Eric should talk
Yeah,
about that stuff.
I mean, the thing that was pretty great about that last sequence is that, like Wes is saying, it takes place in a digital environment, and that's mostly because there wasn't a real place that we found that kind of ticked all the boxes, that we could actually make it, that was close enough to where we were shooting and to make it viable. But we had enough between production art, between the other locations that we did use, like the car park and the interior of a stage building and some of that kind of stuff that we see as they're making their way through the silo, that we could sort of essentially interpolate in between some of those things and use a lot of the same kind of visual language in terms of the architecture.
Keeps you honest, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it gives us both, the camera language that we've kind of already established, leading up to that point in the film, that sort of stabilized handheld aesthetic that the whole movie uses. It gave us all the sort of practical dressing, the kind of aesthetics that we've seen in the earlier stuff that art department, that they had dressed all over the physical locations. So we could essentially take that, okay, we're gonna need gantries, we're gonna need a giant space, these multi-level structures for this chase to take place. So that could all be kind of intuited essentially based on what we had already established in the film. From there, the previous team then dives in and starts trying to find gags, like blocking out where could the chase take us in this space. And that's a lot of back and forth working with Wes in terms of like, no, what if he tackles him here and takes him over the edge? Then what if they splash down? Da, da, da. Finding angles that feel like they're coming. It's coming from a single voice. Right? It's the same filmmaker that's sort of been taking us through this whole journey in the movie. is definitely a challenge to try and make it feel cohesive with the rest of the movie. But we've got some pretty amazing animators at Weta that really get that. They grok the requirements of how, what it means to tell this particular story from this particular filmmaker, and it works out really great. I think from the point of getting the blocking of the various events in that sequence, then it gets into the simulation side of things. And so we have to basically give the animators a really rough, low res water surface to essentially have the characters bobbing along with and fighting against currents and things. And it turns into then needing to figure out where the cameras need to be so that they're not under the water when we don't want them to be under the water, that they're right at the surface, but the surface is really turbulent and all that stuff. So there's a lot of back and forth between the effects department, animation department, and reviews with Wes, trying to figure out like what little tweaks to make to really make the sequence.
I mean, some of those sims were probably days or weeks, right? Some of those water sims. I mean,
yeah, probably multiple days. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, like make a choice, and then a couple of days later, you'll see if you fucked up or not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Part of my language.
Awesome. Well, it was really great talking to you both today on your work on Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Congratulations. You both should be very proud of what's on screen. It's just, I mean, that's absolutely incredible.
Cool. I'm glad you liked it, man.
Very least, it was a really fun time.
So. That's right.
Yeah.
It was a good challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely translates superbly well on screen. So great. Yeah. Well, I wish you all the best on both of your future projects, and hope you have a very good rest of your day.
You too, Ben. Nice to meet you, Maxance.
Thank you, Maxance. There you go. Thank you.